said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt towards Zoar. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east, and the two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. We're all familiar with that story, I think.
Sitting greatly? Is that what it says?
Sinning.
Sinning greatly.
Sinning greatly. First of all, just to get us started, you think it's possible that you guys could name some of the causes for strife in the world today?
Politics.
Politics.
Same thing that they had. Resources.
Resources, economics.
Distribution of wealth.
Pardon?
Distribution of wealth.
Distribution of wealth and land.
Water.
Water. How about religion?
Religion, I prejudice. Other people, you know.
Races?
Other people. Just
Other people in general?
You know,
I mean,
Yeah, all these other people just aren't reasonable.
My operations officer said, my ops officer said people are no damn good.
it is almost endless, the list you could make for the causes of strife in the world today.
How about weather?
Yeah.
How about weather?
Oh, yeah, you bet. And what ends up happening is because of all these different causes of strife, if you were to list them all, you would be able to identify the sources of a lot of hatred. Anger and hatred are the result of these strifes. So, let's take a moment to put this passage that I just read into a proper setting. There had been famine in the Promised Land, most likely caused by a lack of rainfall. That happens once in a while in deserts. we well know. But the dry conditions that were experienced in the Near East and that area of the Holy Land were not necessarily the same dry conditions experienced in Egypt. So Abraham does the only logical thing. He picks up and moves down to Egypt, where conditions are not nearly as bad as they were in the Holy Land. But when he returns, he travels to Bethel to renew his vows to God and to make a new start in the land of Canaan. With the recovery of the dry famine comes a time of plenty and even surplus. And so the riches of the time may have been a real blessing on the one hand, but they were a cause of strife on the other. The relationship between Abraham and Lot become very strained, even though they're brothers. Lot apparently sides with his own herdsmen against his brother Abraham. It is clear that Lot was probably just about as materialistic as Abraham was magnanimous. And when given a choice of the land, he chooses the entire plain of Jordan, which is the richest part of all the land. As it was put in the scripture, Abraham tells him, you want to go to the left, I'll go to the right. You want to take the left, I'll go to the left. So he gives Lot a full choice of what he wants to take. And when given his choice of the land, of course, he chooses the plain of Jordan, which is a large area surrounding the Dead Sea. And Lot settles at the south end of the sea near Sodom. Now, what's important to note in this little experience here for our lesson is that Abraham goes to some length to avoid conflict with his brother. He readily permits Lot to choose any part of the land of Canaan for himself that he wants, while Abraham is willing to be content to take what remains. And of course, Lot selects the well-watered, rich garden area of the area around the Dead Sea. Okay, that's the setting for where we're at. Now, think back for a minute to, if you can, think this far back. I have trouble thinking this far back. But to March 1991. Okay? And let's revisit the experience we all went through when President George H.W. Bush addressed the nation to announce the news that everyone was hoping to hear, and that was that the war was over. All combat operations were being suspended at midnight. Peace negotiations were to begin immediately, and people all over the country, and indeed all over the world, had pretty well stopped whatever they were doing to listen to his address that night. And a lot of people cheered loudly. A lot of people were very enthusiastic. They were thrilled that the war was quick and was done and was over. There were other people who were a little more subdued, a lot more cautious. I mean, there was a lot of hoping that there would be no foul-ups here, no miscalculations, no angry reactions that could reignite the hostilities, you know, all that sort of stuff. And as we recall that time, James Moore tells us we can bring to mind a lot of the vivid pictures and images that forced their way into our minds and have remained in our minds perhaps even to this day. And he lists a few of them here, just to jog your memory a little bit. The image of people coming daily to the altar of their churches to pray for peace. The picture of a family in Detroit, Michigan, who had two sons fighting in the war, one an American Marine, the other an Iraqi foot soldier. The image of yellow ribbons everywhere, on trees and doors and gates and lapels. There was even a case of a homeless man pushing a grocery shopping cart which held all that he owned, and on the front of it was a big yellow ribbon. And who could ever forget the picture of thousands of Iraqi soldiers waving white flags and leaflets? Remember that? Eager for a chance to surrender, they were starved for food and water. Some of them even surrendering to an Italian cameraman, and others surrendering to reporters from major news organizations. There was the image of Iraqi prisoners of war grabbing desperately for food and telling of how they had lived for 28 days on nothing but grass and rainwater. A picture of a young Kurdish soldier who said that he was forced to serve in the Iraqi army after his two brothers were killed because they had refused to volunteer. The picture of a Saudi Arabian soldier helping a weakened Iraqi soldier out of his bunker, and then seeing the Iraqi soldier smile and reach over to kiss the Saudi soldier in gratitude. The image of little children writing letters to First Lady Barbara Bush to express their support and their concerns, with one little girl telling Mrs. Bush that she had been praying for President Bush every night. And then she added as a P.S., "Thank you, Mrs. Bush, for breaking your foot in a sledding accident. No other First Lady would have done that for us." Here's a picture of General Norman Schwarzkopf giving that now famous press conference in Saudi Arabia, outlining the details of the war effort in his familiar authoritative style, and prompting the late radio commentator Paul Harvey to say, when General Schwarzkopf says, "Sit down," you don't even look to see if there's a chair. The painful image of 95% of the people in Baghdad drinking and bathing in the Tigris River, one of the most polluted rivers in the world. The somber picture of hundreds of blazing oil wells scorching the earth, the burnt-out cars and tanks, the vans littering the roads and desert spaces. The picture of people by the thousands dancing in the streets of Kuwait City, hugging one another, celebrating their freedom, and thanking coalition soldiers. And then there was the picture of Army Specialist Christine Mays from Rochester Mills, Pennsylvania. She'd gotten engaged to be married on February 17th, and on that day left for Saudi Arabia. 8 days later, a Scud missile slammed into her barracks. 29 soldiers killed, 99 injured. One of those who died was Christine Mays. She had been engaged for 8 days, 22 years old. Well, you know, there are other images and pictures, but I think we all recall that period of time, and we all experience those kind of things. As in any similar situation, these kind of events are very heart-wrenching, and even when we think back on them, some of them kind of tug at our emotions. A very similar event happened thousands of years ago in the Middle East region, in almost the same place, or right close to it, from present-day Kuwait. And it also revolved around a dispute over land.
That's interesting.
Moses and Lot.
Abraham and Lot.
I mean, Moses.
Whatever.
Where is my mind?
Comfortable there, do you want me to get you a chair?
No, I'm so likely to.
So Abraham
I'm
and
okay,
his
so
nephew
Lord, sit
Lot
up straight.
had a problem. The herdsmen had not learned to share the fruits of the land. There was a lot of conflict, bickering, quarreling, and fighting. And they had become the definition, that had become the definition of their relationships, quarreling and bickering. How should the land be divided up and used in a fair and equitable way? Big question. Well, Abraham steps up. He is the senior person. He ranks highest in the family structure. But he chooses to deal with the problem as a peacemaker. A fact showing his generosity and grace. Now, perhaps this very scene was foremost in the mind of Jesus, for all we know, when he spoke the words, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." What could be more God-like than a ministry of reconciliation and peace? Well, how does the story from Genesis finally end? Abraham received God's blessing and a covenant with God. Lot's arrogance and selfish aggressiveness causes him all sorts of problems, not the least of which was his wife being turned into a pillar of salt. I don't know, maybe Lot thought that was a good thing, I don't know. But it certainly didn't seem that way.
All right.
Yes.
Well,
A lot more
what
easy to
does this
translate.
gracious spirit of Abraham teach us? Abraham had this gracious spirit of reconciliation and peace, and what can we learn from it today? What does it teach us? Well, what if we were to apply Abraham's attitude toward the world today? What if the nations of earth were to say to each other, "Let there be no strife between us"? How much more of value would that be today in a world that has become a global village, right? A world in which communications and travel have shrunk things to the point where we're all so much more aware of one another, we're all neighbors to one another, we're all interrelated with one another, we all have to share with one another. What kind of a message would that mean in the world today as opposed to the world then? You know, you can say, as Disney did, it is a small world after all. The obvious lesson is this: somehow we have to stop perceiving other nations as enemies and see them more realistic as neighbors with whom we have to share everything human. We have to learn somehow to declare a moratorium on hate. Peace ain't ever going to come any other way as long as there is hatred.
You know, kindness, a lot of times is seen as weakness. I mean, and that's just, you know, among nations.
Right, and that comes from the basic attitude, good guys lose, nice guys lose.
I mean, I'm just throwing
You
that
know,
out.
well, it's a very typical human state of mind, yes, you bet. And so when two nations get into conflict, neither one is willing to show weakness by being nice about it, and it builds up and feeds on itself. Now, here's a little thing that I thought was kind of interesting. Think of us here in America. Okay? In 1755, there was the French and Indian War, and we were told to hate the French and love the British. In 1776, there was the American Revolution, and we were told to hate the British and love the French. In 1799, we were mad at the French again, and in 1812, we were at odds with the British again. In 1861, there was the Civil War with the North and South hating each other. And in one recent decade, we loved the Chinese and hated the Japanese, and then we loved the Japanese and hated the Chinese. We don't know about Russians. In Korea, we hated everyone north of an imaginary line, and in Vietnam, things were even more messed up. Well, all of us were probably taught in Sunday school somewhere along the line, and we were probably taught by our parents somewhere along the line, that we shouldn't hate people. And maybe some of us have even been able to do that over the course of our lives. I don't know. But what about everybody else? You know, let's be pious here. What about everybody else? Those people who never went to Sunday school. Those people, for as a matter of fact, have never even heard the Christian message of love. Those whose parents and religious leaders teach hatred. What chance is there ever going to be that we have world peace?
More or less.
What chance that it'll ever happen? Can we still possibly believe that there's anything at all we can do as individual persons to resolve the strife and conflict that causes hatred? Is there any chance at all?
Oh, dear.
Well, Teddy
Well-
Roosevelt had an idea.
What was that?
Speak softly
Oh,
and
carry a big stick. That's right. What if we were to apply Abraham's attitude of peacemaking and reconciliation to our families? Okay? After all, the story in Genesis is about a family squabble, right? Abraham took the high road. He became a reconciler. He could have complained. He could have demanded his rights, like any good American would certainly do today. But he chose the way of grace. And he basically said, hey, let's just settle this. Let's make things right between us. And I will concede to you to do what you feel you need to do. It's a very magnanimous thing to do. It never ceases to amaze how torn apart families can get, and often over the silliest things. Some years ago, James Moore said he visited with a family whose problem could have been solved in 5 minutes if their arrogant selfishness could have just been put aside for 5 minutes, and a little bit of love and goodwill could have been shown by somebody. Members of that family had not spoken to one another for over a year because of a ridiculous misunderstanding over who should inherit a clock that wouldn't even run. A broken clock, not worth $25, ripped this family to shreds. Well, we all know of cases similar to that. The moral of the story, James Moore says, if there's a problem in your family, for heaven's sakes, go fix it. You know, swallow your pride, swallow your ego, forget about your rights. Make things right between each other like Abraham did. You'd be surprised what could happen. He says life is too short for family estrangement. It's just not worth it. And on top of everything else, it'll probably make you physically and spiritually ill. What if we applied Abraham's attitude, Abraham's reconciliatory attitude, to theology? What would we get out of that? Well, it asks the question, where did Abraham get that gracious spirit? Where did it come from?
I think it was inborn.
Well, it might have been. It might have been part of his basic character. But we have to assume that this comes from God.
Yeah, I was gonna say from,
Yeah,
his relationship with
he is
God.
demonstrating the kind of generosity and forgiveness and reconciliation that we say is the Spirit of God. In fact, you could condense this gracious Spirit of God into the person of Jesus Christ. God sent that gift into the world and was essentially saying to the world, let there be no strife between us, people and God. Let there be no strife between us. Let's fix this thing. And I even have a paraphrase of John 3:16. Everybody knows John 3:16, right? God so loved the world that he gave his only Son to become our peace, the one who could break down the divisive walls of hostility. That's a real stretch paraphrase. I'm allowed to take certain liberties.
And you have.
Yes, I am. In the February 1991 edition of Life magazine, there was an article entitled Lee Atwater's Last Campaign. And it was written by Lee Atwater. Just 1 year earlier, Lee Atwater had been the chairman of the Republican National Committee, you may recall. He was a very rough and tough politician. In fact, he was widely known as the pit bull of American politics.
When was this? What year was this?
1991. And then, overnight, all of a sudden, he became completely changed. Totally different person. And he said, it's very simple. I found Jesus Christ. He made the difference, and I'm glad I found him while there was still time left. In March of 1990, Lee Atwater was making one of his hard-driving speeches. He had just made a cynical attack on Michael Dukakis, the 1988 Democratic candidate for president. And then, while he was giving that speech, suddenly his left foot and leg, and then his whole side began to shake and twitch uncontrollably, and then he collapsed. Later at the hospital, Lee Atwater and his family learned the cause: inoperable brain cancer. That changed Atwater.
I guess so.
As a photo caption with the Life article in the magazine indicates, he stopped reading Machiavelli and started reading the Bible. And God came into his life as never before. In a separate interview, he said, I have found Jesus Christ. I don't hate anybody anymore. For the first time in my life, I don't hate somebody. I have nothing but good feelings toward everybody. There just isn't any point in fighting and feuding. He said, I've come a long way since the day I told George Bush that his kinder, gentler theme was a nice thought, but it wouldn't win us any votes. I used to say that the president might be kinder and gentler, but I wasn't going to be. How wrong I was. There's nothing more important in life than human beings, nothing sweeter than the human touch. He did, in fact, spend the rest of his life making peace with his former enemies before he died. He actually sent I'm sorry letters to everyone he had opposed. He asked every one of his opponents for forgiveness. And he talked about the redeeming and reconciling love of God. That's how it works. That's how it works. God's reconciling love can change people and motivate them to imitate God's graciousness. And it becomes a continuing force, kind of. So when you look at the world today, at all the hatred and anger and conflict and everything else, is there any hope at all? Yeah, there's hope. It only comes from one place. There's only one way that it'll ever happen. And on a very minute scale, it's the way it happened to Lee Atwater. So if you hear a voice in your head saying something like, let's not have any strife or argument between us, it might be the voice of Abraham you hear bouncing around back in there someplace.
That'd be good.
That would be good. There's a good
Now,
lesson.
next week, we're gonna hear the voice of Joseph saying, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." And we'll allude to the story of Joseph, which we all know inside out and backwards, right?
And everybody will know where we are next Sunday.
And hopefully everybody will know where we are. Of course, Nancy is still in the hospital.